What's up, podcast world chat? I'm back at you, another episode of This Life Ain't For Everybody. Today's episode of the podcast is again brought to you by our friends in Lynchburg, Tennessee, the one and only, the most American company in existence, in my opinion, Jack Daniels. What they've done for myself, our crew, over the years, our lives, our father's lives, our grandpa's lives, whether it was a breakup, whether it was a good time, a sad time, Jack Daniels has always been for there. The pride that they take in their sour mash Tennessee whiskey is unparalleled. Enjoy it responsibly. Never allow underage drinking. Jack Daniels, an iconic brand. We are so humbled and proud to be part of the Jack Daniels family. More to come in the future. We can't wait to show you some of the projects we're currently working on with the team at Jack Daniels. Support them. They support conservation. They support America. They support the American hunter, the American provider. And that's what we try to do to the best of our ability. We're so happy about today's podcast because we get to pay homage to the military. We get to learn about the military. We get to talk to a real life fighter pilot that you watch Top Gun, and a lot of fighter pilots say, well, don't bring that movie up. But as an American, we got introduced, especially people my age, back in 86, 87, there was a movie come out called Top Gun with Tom Cruise and Val Kilmer and many others that kind of brought to the forefront what fighter pilots do and their training and the academy and everything that goes into it. And we all understand that that's Hollywood. But our man today, his name is Jeremiah. His call name is Biff. I know Biff as a mutual friend of ours, Tim Montana, introduced us, and I got to learn about him on a FaceTime call one night over at Jack Daniels, and I was just intrigued as heck. And to know that this man has done what he's done in an F-16 and F-18, we're going to learn all about that today. Biff, welcome, my brother.
Hey, Chad. Thanks, man. It's a pleasure to be here. Good to see you.
First off, thank you for your service.
My pleasure. Thank you for your support.
Now, just let me give the viewers that aren't going, or the listeners and viewers, mainly the listeners that aren't going to watch this on YouTube, I hope you do. You're in a uniform, and you have a full-blown mustache, and your hair is perfectly combed. Like, I'm very jealous, first of all, of the hair. And is this uniform you're wearing one that we would find you in the cockpit?
Oh yeah, yeah. So, and thank you. I appreciate the compliment on my hair and mustache, because if there's one group of people who have better hair than Navy SEALs, it's fighter pilots.
I love it.
Yeah, but so today, actually, we were on a no-fly day today. So I just was in doing a little bit of work in my office, but we're kind of, as the whole coronavirus thing has gone down, we've been on a very much kind of reduced schedule, down to like mission essential personnel. And then in my current position, I have to do a lot of work on some of the classified systems. So I kind of bebop in and out of the office. We have a whole cleaning crew that comes in, sanitize, disinfect, try to keep everyone as safe as possible during this whole coronavirus pandemic.
When you say mission essential personnel, at one time in your career, would you have been deemed that? And are you saying that you're not right now and that's why you're not flying?
Oh, no, we're still very much mission essential personnel. And I guess there's always levels of that, right? So by far the most mission essential people are the ones who are either heading out the door or currently downrange on deployment. What I do in my current position, I'm in a test unit. And so we execute operational tests for the Navy in the F-18 and then the EA-18 Growler. So we're kind of the final check on new systems, radar, software, weapons, things like that are getting put into the Rhino and the Growler before it goes out to the fleet.
And are these some of the more advanced, updated, evolved aircrafts that our military and our fighter pilots are conducting missions in over in theater currently?
Oh yeah. So the F-18, I fly I fly three versions of the F-18. I fly the F-18E, F, and then the EA-18G. So this is the latest version of the F-18. Obviously, the brand new airplanes out on the street are the F-35s. The F-35C in particular for the Navy is going out onto the boat very soon. It's just kind of about a year ago, it was deemed operationally ready, and the first F-35 squadron for the Navy was stood up. The F-35 version in the Air Force and in the Marine Corps has been stood up for a couple of years, and very soon, the very first F-35C squadron will be out there sailing the seas. Okay,
so I have to ask some layman's terms questions to you, because when I first met you, I was just like, man, this dude has you do it. And the first thing that I always learn about military is that it's it's just another day to you guys because you are so trained and you're so good at what you do. And then you find a person like me that never enrolled, never went into the military. And I always ask, and I'm sure Tim does too, because Tim gets to work with a lot of military. I always ask Biff, like, do you guys ever look down on people that didn't do it, that didn't go into it, that are maybe trying to pay their respects to the military in a different format or show that they are warriors in a different format? I don't know if that question makes sense, but I always often wonder if a guy like you looks at a guy like me and says, man, he's just living off of what I've built and what I defend. And I know that you guys don't, but a lot of times that comes over to me because I always wish, like, damn it, I wish I would have had the means to do what Biff is doing, because I don't know if you could live a more fulfilled life than, first of all, defending our freedoms in our country, but then doing it in a freaking F-18 and knowing your way around that and flying it. So talk to me a little bit about your lookout on the American public and how a fighter pilot views the people that you meet, like myself or Tim Montana or somebody that didn't necessarily serve.
Yeah, I mean, probably the common denominator that most everyone's going to have is like they're really grateful for the opportunity to do it, right? Like I am grateful for every time I get to climb in the cockpit, fire up the motor, strap in, and then ride that airplane up into the sky. Like I'm super grateful for doing it. And as far as like when you look at people who like chose a different path in life, like who didn't serve, I think your podcast name kind of says it all, right? Like this life ain't for everybody. It certainly isn't, and that's fine. You know, that's part of it, right? Like everyone's got to make different choices in life and follow their callings, follow their passions, follow what they want to do. For me, I knew from day one that I can remember, like that serving in the military was going to be a part of my life. You know, it's maybe not going to be all my life. I've been doing it for 15 years now, active duty. But I kind of knew that it was going to be a part of my life. Like I grew up in a military family. Both my parents were in the Army. My granddaddy was in the Air Force for 30 years. And then we kind of got service going all the way back to the Revolutionary War in my family. So it was just kind of part of it. My aunts and uncles were all in the military in various branches. My sisters both were in the military. My cousins are all in the military. It's just like being in the military is kind of what we do in my family. And it was just kind of like a natural choice for us, but it was certainly not you look down on anybody else that doesn't do it. You're just really grateful for the opportunity to be able to serve.
So when you say that you knew from day one, tell me about that. How did you know that it was your calling? And then take me through the transition of the actual pilot part of it.
Sure.
Did you always have an admiration and a just this desire, overwhelming desire that you wanted to fly? Were you always intrigued by aircraft? And take me back to the days when you knew, because how old are you right now? Are you in your mid 30s?
I'm 37.
It's 37. So you've been serving since you were 22 years old. Take me back to when you knew that you were going to enter, and how did it all come about? And then transition me into the cockpit.
Yeah, so like I said, I grew up in a military family. That's kind of what we do, and so I always kind of figured I would serve in some capacity. As I was growing up, I was blind as a bat. I had like 2800 vision, big old thick Coke bottle glasses. But I was always fascinated with flying, mainly because of my granddaddy. My granddaddy flew bombers in World War II, and then all through the Cold War. And so I grew up, asking granddaddy for World War II stories and flying stories. And then when I was a kid, I think I was probably 3 or 4 years old, we had a big family gathering and we all watched Star Wars, like all three of the original Star Wars one night. And everybody else fell asleep, but I was just fascinated with Star Wars and being the greatest fighter pilot in the galaxy. I think those two influences, like my granddaddy and Star Wars, and then wanting to be in the military, just like really captivated my just my attention, and kind of was my goal throughout my whole childhood. And then I kind of figured out about halfway through middle school that when you're blind as a bat, you can't go and fly airplanes. So then I kind of started looking at doing other things in the military, right? Like looking at going to the special operations, going infantry, doing Marines, any number of different things in just being in the military, because that's kind of what I always wanted to do. And then as I was in high school, so I grew up, I was born in Tennessee. So it's appropriate that, you got Jack Daniels is one of the sponsors because I always appreciate being back home. So I was born in Nashville, and I grew up on a little horse farm in Lexington, Kentucky, kind of out in the middle of nowhere. And I really just wanted to get out of there and go see the world when it came time to go to school. And so I fell in love with like snow skiing and whitewater. And so I kind of wanted to go to school out in Colorado. So I was looking at different schools out there, figured out that the Air Force Academy was out there. I'd gone and visited when I was a little kid, so I started to look at that a little bit more. I went out to the academy, and when I was there, this was in, I guess, 2000 timeframe, I found out that the Air Force had started allowing laser eye surgery. And so this little dream that had kind of always been on the back burner for me of being able to fly jets suddenly was going to maybe be a reality. So I initially didn't get into the academy. I kind of got into one of the later rounds of admissions. I was actually one day away. I was just going to go to school at like CU Boulder or somewhere and just go to Colorado. And then the congressman called me and was like, "Hey, congratulations, you're going to the Air Force Academy." I was like, "Oh, okay. Well, I guess I'll go do that then." So I went out to the academy in 2001 and then graduated in 2005, full of pride. And then went into the training pipeline after that.
So before we move on, you went and got the surgery and then did not make it into the academy, and then you had vision right now, and then all of a sudden you're like, "Well, I got the vision, but I'm still going to go to Colorado." Then the congressman calls you?
Yeah, no, sorry. So I went out and did a visit, and I was still blind as a bat. Went out and did a visit, found out that they were allowing the surgery and that the Air Force would actually do the surgery on me. So I went to school, and then in between, I think it was my 2-degree year or junior year, I kind of went and they did I had the PRK surgery done. So it was about a pretty miserable week of having the laser eye surgery and then the recovery from that. But afterwards, I had 2015 vision, went from 2800 to 2015, my junior year at the Air Force Academy. And then that kind of put me on a path that I could then go and fly.
All right. So that's where it gets interesting. I know that everything's interesting, in different aspects, but now you actually are in a position to where you have this back in front of you. Like it was a dream. It was on the back burner. Now here it is, right? Yep. You look at a UFC fighter, Biff, and you're like, do you get nervous? And heck yeah, they do, right? They got to be nervous to go into that octagon and to get to make money getting punched in the face, right? How intimidating was it? And how nervous were you when you finally were like, man, this is reality now. Like I might be in an F-18 doing maneuvers and missions and not just flying, you're going to be flying over wartime airfield. You're going to be in theater. You're going to be on missions. Was there thoughts going through your head like, well, maybe I don't want this reality anymore? Or did you just go full bore when it was time to roll?
Nah, I was pretty into it. But you take it in baby steps, right? So when I was at the academy, they've got a whole bunch of aviation programs there. So the first one that I did was I learned how to fly gliders while I was at school. So I remember the first time then climbing in a glider and like, okay, I'm gonna fly this, glider around. Having the instructor kind of show me how to do it, how to do the takeoff and the aero tow and then release, and then just kind of act like a little bird flying around there. Did that a couple times, was good enough to then, all right, they're going to trust me with the airplane solo. And that's always one of for any pilot, that's always a really important time in their aviation career is the first time you get to take an airplane solo. And it's like, all right, you're going to break ground and it's up to you. Ain't nobody else going to save you when you're up there. You got to do it all yourself. So that was like a really cool growing experience as an aviator, your first solo. So I did mine on the glider, and then I figured out that I really enjoyed doing that. So then I kind of worked up and started teaching other cadets how to fly in the glider. And then went into powered flight, got my private pilot's license. And then the first time, they kind of hand you the keys to a powered airplane. They're like, all right, go take it solo. Make sure you can come back and land and don't screw it up. It was pretty cool. And then that just gradual progression happens all throughout the rest of training until someday, you're given the keys to a multi-million-dollar fighter jet. And it's like, all right, time to go to war.
And that's not intimidating. That wasn't did that cause a certain nervoso right there of now you are in the F-18 and you are going over on missions?
Yeah, there's always a little bit, but you just kind of take it step at a time, and you trust your training, you trust your abilities. There's a lot of guys and a lot of hours that have gone into it to prepare you for it, so that when the time comes, you want that. Like when it comes to deployment time, for me, that's all I ever wanted to do was go deploy and do your job.
So you do your job. You do your job with the best training in the world. Are you scared to die? Like when to have the mindset of a fighter pilot doing what you do, are you 100% confident in your training and your ability? Obviously you have to be, but is there still a fear in the back of your mind when you start to take off and get in the position to be in theater?
No, not really. You're ready for it.
You're ready for it. Do you think you were born with it?
Certainly. There's certainly a the nature versus nurture debate. Yeah, absolutely. I do think that I was born with that desire to do it, and then that was enabled and grown by my mentors and by the training.
Do you think that the conversations with Granddaddy and growing up nurtured it more into you of like yeah, let's go kind of like maybe if your granddaddy would have happened to be Vince Lombardi, you might have been the same way on the gridiron, but
Probably.
this was what it was, right? This is what you were destined to do pretty much.
Oh yeah. It's one of my favorite things. So like my granddaddy, he was a navigator on B-29s. So he was one of the guys that was firebombing Tokyo in World War II, flying out of Guam and Marianas primarily. And then towards the end of the war, I think they were in Okinawa after the battles in Okinawa. He was flying out of there. And we used to sit on stumps down by the lake, and he would sit there and point out all the stars that he used to navigate to and from Japan by. And, it was telling me stories about like when they were training, I think it was in Guam or maybe somewhere. Like he was in training. It was a Sunday mission that they were going on, and Granddaddy really wanted to go to church, and so he slid to another crew to go later in the afternoon. His crew took off, and then they flew into a mountain, and everybody was killed. So I think from a early age, you just sort of accept that when you sign on the dotted line to join the military, you're going up to and including your life. That's just kind of a given. That's part of it. Everybody's got to die sometime, right? Might as well go out doing something that you love. So like going back to your question about, are you scared? I mean, yeah, there's always a little bit of nervousness there, but that you're prepared, and it's just a part of your everyday reality. I kind of was honestly a little bit surprised after I made it into my 30s, because I didn't really think I was ever going to make it there. And then after you make it to 30, you're like, oh, well, I guess I'll keep doing this. This is having a good time.
Wait a minute though. Are you a daredevil and you're an adrenaline junkie and you thought you might get in a motorcycle wreck jumping over a ditch in your off seat when you're not flying? Or did you think that you wouldn't make it into your 30s because you'd be killed on a mission?
I figured one of the two is going to probably get you at some point. I don't think that I'm necessarily a daredevil or an adrenaline junkie.
Really?
My mom might disagree with you, but no, I just kind of figured that it was going to happen at some point. And then the whole idea is you try to work to keep that off as long as possible, right? And be as good as possible. And then maybe it doesn't. And so far, I'm still here.
So when you're not there, do you want to be there with your brothers? Do you want to be like all the time?
Absolutely.
So if you had it your way, would you work 40 hours a week overseas in mission and then come back here for the weekend and then go back over there? I know that that's far-fetched, but if you had it your way, would you be over there all the time doing that on just one deployment after the next?
It's interesting, right? Because as soon as I always kind of figured, like, we usually do about 6-month deployments or so. So the first couple months that you're there are awesome. You're getting into the fight. You're in a good battle rhythm. By month 4 or 5, you're kind of tired of the same thing, and it becomes Groundhog Day. And then by month 6, you're really kind of ready to go home for a bit. And then usually about a week after I would get home, it's like, okay, I'm ready to go back.
Wow.
So yeah, I mean, and if they were to come to me tomorrow and say, hey, you want to go deploy? My bag's already packed. I'm ready to go.
It's like you're a musician. It's like the same theory. And you're talking about giving your life up and fighting in war as a musician is like, can't wait to get off the road and go see my family. But then he's there for he or she's there for 3 or 4 days. And they're like, can't wait to go back out and see the fans and be around the energy of the crowd. Right. It's like just different levels. And I know that's, it's not like the exact correlation or it's consistent with what you do as a fighter pilot, but it just blows my mind that when you're in enemy territory like that you can't wait to get back. It just doesn't make sense. It doesn't trigger in some normal person's, not normal, like you're not normal. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that people that don't do it, like myself, it doesn't trigger me. Like, how could you ever say that you can't wait to get back to enemy territory? But you hear it consistently through warriors like yourself that's what they live for.
Yeah. Well, I think, everyone, man's search for meaning and purpose, right? Like you want to do things in your life that you derive meaning and purpose from. For me, there's been no greater experience than going to war. Like going to war, I got better when I went to war because you find real purpose there. Like you never matter anymore, particularly as a fighter pilot, right? Like flying over in Afghanistan and you are the close air support for the 18-year-old on the ground with a rifle. Like you are his lifeline. You are the key that can bring him home with the weapons and the ordnance that you bring, right? So it's like all about, can I put bombs exactly where they need to be, exactly when they need to be there, get there, save those guys, bring them back home. Like there's nothing in the world that's like that. There's absolutely nothing in the world that's like that. And you never matter more than in those moments. And that's important.
And how many of those quote unquote moments have you been involved in, Biff? First off, but I want to make sure that I respect your intel and everything. Is it kosher for a person in your status and your experience and your tenure with the military to be able to talk about specifics of being over there? Is it kosher? Is it ethical? And then obviously the next part of that question would be the warriors that come back and take it to the levels of Hollywood and scripted and make money off of what they experienced in that. I don't know if you're even allowed to talk about that point of view of what you've experienced and how do you look at the ones that come back and write the books or get the movie deals.
Sure.
There's different levels of talking about it. Can you talk about it on a podcast? Can you talk about it around a campfire? Emotionally, can you manage it and talk about it with what you've experienced and seen? I don't want to disrespect any of those parts of what we're getting into here as far as the actual missions go. So just tell me where you stand on that a little bit.
Yeah. Obviously we don't talk about anything classified, right? Like I'm not going to reveal classified data or specifics of missions or techniques, tactics, procedures, things like that. So you don't get into any of that stuff. But I think it's actually really important to be able to talk about what happened. There's a great book called On Combat and On Killing, which were written by an Army psychologist that talk about, how is it that you find a place for the experiences in combat? And one of the things that he talks about is it's important to be able to talk about it and to find a way to divorce the memory from the emotion of it, right? Like if you can do that and you can hold on to the memories, but divorce it from the emotion, that's how you prevent the post-traumatic stress from becoming post-traumatic stress disorder. So it's important to talk about it. Honestly, the best place to talk about it certainly is around a campfire. And, guys that take it and write books and go to Hollywood, I certainly got no problem with that. It's probably not going to be a path that I'm going to take. But I think it is very important to be able to talk about that kind of stuff. And, for me, like my experience and especially, being a pilot, you're pretty far removed from a lot of the person-to-person violence, that a guy would experience on the ground in ground combat and hand-to-hand combat. We're pretty far removed from that. And so it's a different experience, certainly flying combat versus being on the ground. And so they're two different experiences. But it's important to be able to find a place for it and to be able to talk about it. So yeah, I don't have any problems with talking about it. I think it's important to do.
So when you're on a deployment of 6 months and you're stationed in a particular spot, when you're stationed as a fighter pilot, are you with the other segments of the military as far as the ground, the people on the ground? Are you around Marines? Are you around the Army? Are you around any special forces? Are the special forces in a different spot to where that nobody ever knows where they're at because they're on a, very high intel secret mission?
Sure.
Do you see the devastation as a fighter pilot, though? When you come back, are you around the medics? Do you see what's going on? Or are you guys held away from all of that as well?
No, well, every deployment location is different. So I did my first deployment over to Afghanistan. And so we were flying out of Bagram Air Base over in Afghanistan, which is just north of Kabul up in the mountains. And at Bagram, there's the whole mess of everybody from all the services, all the special operations. We would do missions every day with the special operations folks. And so we'd go over their compound, have a face-to-face, plan out what those guys are going to execute, go back, figure out what our timelines are going to be and when we're going to be overhead to provide support to them. So yeah, we kind of would liaise with those guys on a daily basis. Same thing with the ground units. If we're supporting a conventional Army or a conventional Marine ground unit, we would have what's called a GLOW, or a ground liaison officer, who is like an Army guy who's assigned to our fighter squadron as kind of the liaison back and forth between the ground units and us. And then we could call up the JTACs, so the Joint Terminal Air Attack Controllers, who are, either Air Force or sometimes other joint services, who are specialists in employing air power. So they're running around with the units on the ground. And then they're the guy that I'm talking to on the radio who's calling for fires, giving me what's called a 9-line briefing, which is where they transfer information about where they want us to put weapons and effects down. And so, you're involved with those guys on a daily basis. And then when you come back to Bagram, there's a big hospital there in Bagram. And so when you're downtime, a lot of us would go over there to the hospital, volunteer, see some of the soldiers who are wounded, take care, roll bandages, all that kind of thing. So no, you're in it. Or at least I was on my first deployment significantly. On some of the other ones, like where you're kind of stationed off, maybe you don't see a lot of the other ground combat elements when you're like stationed outside of the individual country. But when we were in Afghanistan, yeah, you saw that stuff on a daily basis.
And were you prepared for that? Did it get to that point to where you had to talk about that? Because I would assume seeing your brothers and sisters in harm's way and wounded and volunteering at a hospital like that would leave images in your mind of, man, this is real. This is like, can you get that out of your head? Did that mess you up at all? Or have you always had the mental capacity to be able to separate it?
I was always pretty good at separating it. It really reinforces how important it is to do a good job, right? Like to be the guy that doesn't screw up. That there's I don't know if you've ever seen that movie, The Right Stuff, where it kind of talks about like test pilots in the 1950s. And, the prayer of almost every single pilot before they go on a mission or do anything is, "Dear Lord, please don't let me screw up." So that's kind of like the most important thing there, is just to not, so being around that, I don't think it certainly left me with indelible images and memories, but I don't think it like on an emotional level has hindered me. It just left me with a real impression of how important it is to do a good job.
Did you ever question yourself? Did you ever get questioned on a mission to where you didn't do a good job or a mistake was made? Is it inevitable that a mistake will be made?
Yeah. I mean, I've never flown a perfect sortie yet. Nobody has. And thankfully on the combat missions, I haven't had anything that went absolutely terribly wrong, where I screwed up so bad that, you're going to get hung out to dry or something like that. Thankfully I've been able to, I've both been lucky and good. And like my grandmother said, it's better to be lucky than good sometimes. So thankfully, no, I haven't had any of those experiences where you really screw something up bad. And the whole thing is just keep working on your training and remember it, follow through with it, stick to the procedures, stick to the basics, and usually keep you safe.
When you're a fighter pilot in theater, Biff, are you always on call, or do you have a strict schedule, or could it be at any given time of a 24-hour period that your radio goes off and you get a knock on the door, however it goes down, and you're in that cockpit and you're ready? And I'm trying to say, is there any socializing? Is there a time to where you can go relieve stress with the guys on the bar at the base and get a cocktail, or does a fighter pilot have to be 100% clean and ready to go at all times when he or she's over there?
No, man, there's a whole schedule that you're on. So like when you're on a deployment, particularly, so in the Air Force, we would deploy as squadrons and we would usually operate on a 24-hour schedule so that there was always airplanes flying at some point. And so, yeah, you have to schedule people smartly to give them the right rest and the right relaxation time to then, kind of reset, get ready to fly again the next day. So yeah, like you're always on a kind of schedule for that. Some places, like when we're in Afghanistan, you'd also be standing alert. So there would be a guy who would be scheduled to stand alert, or there'd be usually two crews that were on alert, because you always fly at least as a two ship or two airplanes flying together. So you stand in alert shift where you have the jets, what we call hot cocked, so they're all ready to go. And you would have to be in the squadron around the jets, and you kind of set a different alert posture, right? So that if the horn goes off and they need the alert jets to launch, you could then be airborne in about 15 minutes from the time the call came in. I think my best alert launch was 6 minutes from the time the horn went off till we were wheels in the well. And those, I think probably those are my favorite deployment memories, is launching on alert, because it was literally like we had this old World War II air siren that when the alert phone would ring, it's literally a red phone that was sitting at the operations desk where you control and monitor daily operations. When that alert phone goes off, picks it up, blasts an air horn, somebody goes and grabs the World War II alert siren, and literally like everyone goes sprinting to the jets who's on the alert crew. You're jumping in, throwing your gear on, turning the motors on. There's a big call that goes out over the radio: alert launch, alert launch, alert launch. So they wave off all their airplanes. The runway gets cleared for you. You blast, and then you're immediately launching. And, when they call the alert, it's usually because guys are getting shot at and guys are dying and they need help. So you always know when you're launching on alert, you're going to get right into it. So yeah, that's probably some of the most adrenaline filled moments flying a jet, is launching on alert.
And when you launch, how long is that runway? How long is it from acceleration, start up to when you take off? Is it a bush plane like 40 feet, or do you need an entire 1 mile runway to launch? How long does it take to get off the ground in an F-18?
Yeah. So the F-8, when I was doing that, I was flying F-15Es. So I was a Strike Eagle guy in the Air Force. And then what I'm doing, flying F-18s right now with the Navy, I've only been doing this for about 2.5 years. I'm just on an exchange. I'm like the Air Force dude who's on loan to a Navy squadron for a little bit. So kind of seeing how the other half lives. So when I was flying F-15s, how long your takeoff roll is always dependent on how heavy you are, and then the altitude that you're at. So at Bagram, you're sitting up at, I think the field elevation at Bagram was around 5,000 feet. And then we were taking off loaded for bear with lots of bombs and gas, which is one of the kind of the main advantages of flying a Strike Eagle, is you got bombs, gas, and two people in the cockpit who are working to employ those. So I think our takeoff roll at Bagram was somewhere around, 3,000 feet, somewhere in there. So about half a mile, maybe a quarter to a half a mile or so of a takeoff roll. And then because it was, you're in the middle of Afghanistan, we're doing combat takeoffs where you want to get going as fast as you can, and then get up as high as you can outside of any of the small arms envelope, or for people shooting at you at the end of the runway. So those are always like super fun takeoffs because you basically leave the thing plugged in max AV, get going as fast as you can, then stand it on its end and get up high.
Which is how fast?
So usually I think we would pull, somewhere around like 400 knots or so, 450 knots, basically try to get going as fast as you can. And then by the time you hit the end of the runway and the end of the fence, because the rest of the right outside the fence is Indian country. So then you kind of pull right at the fence.
And 450 knots is how many mph?
You're doing over 500 miles an hour.
On the ground?
Yeah, you're getting after it.
Good night. How awesome is that? So then you pull, when you say you pull up, the nose of the F-18 is pointed straight up into the air?
Yeah, not quite 90 degrees up. Again, it's all about energy management. So flying a fighter is all about managing your energy and doing it smartly, right? So like I want to get going as fast as I can while I'm low. I'm going to get pulled up, but if I go straight bullseye nose high, I'm going to bleed off my energy really quickly. And then I'm just going to be a grape up there that somebody can shoot. So I'm usually going to pull up between like 40 to 60 degrees nose high, somewhere in there. Feels kind of like it's standing on its end. The earth kind of falls away behind you as you rocket up. And then you make sure that you don't just stay in that attitude because you're going to fall out of the sky eventually. You got to maintain a tactical airspeed. So rolling over on your back, pulling down, getting back to level flight, and then continuing to accelerate. They're pretty fun.
Yeah, I could see. I mean, my feeling in my body is probably not as what yours is, but it's close. Like I'm like, man, I want to do that. Like so you roll over on the back, so the plane's upside down, and then that's how you come down a little bit and get into normal airspeed.
Yep. Yeah, because that's the fastest way to get back to level flight is to roll inverted and pull versus a bunt where you're kind of pushing, and that's so you'd be doing negative G's and kind of floating up in the cockpit. You always want to maintain positive G's because it's a faster way to do it and it's way more comfortable on the body. And plus, you're flying a fighter for a reason. Go upside down.
So as a commercial pilot, you have air traffic control to watch the skies, and they have towers everywhere, and they're watching whether it's weather, they're watching other aircrafts. Is a tower built in a war zone? Do you guys construct a tower and erect something that you have an air traffic control guy that's doing the same thing that a ATC person would be doing commercially in America?
Yeah. So like you'll have the control tower at Bagram was literally the old control tower. They built a new one a couple of years after we took it over, in 2001. But like when they first established the airfield in 2001, they had combat controllers that went in, took over the airfield, and they were using like the old like Afghani Russian control tower for a long time, controlling airplanes in and out of the airfield. They eventually built a normal one. So there's a big control tower there at Bagram, just like any other airfield, and it's staffed with just military controllers.
When the siren goes off and that red phone rings and you're on alert and you're in the cockpit, is it vary with how far you are? Obviously it does. So give me some ideas of how far were you from that combat zone to where you were headed, to where you were getting in position to start firefight or drop bombs. Is it miles? Is it hundreds of miles? How far is it?
It could be any of the above. A lot of the times, like when I was there, we were flying primarily in the eastern part of Afghanistan, up in the mountains, places where artillery couldn't reach to get to our soldiers on the ground. So we were their fire support. So usually it would be within a couple 100 miles, which in an F-15 you can cover pretty quickly. And then down to my closest alert launch was I launched off the runway, did a circle, and then dropped a bomb a mile off of the end of the runway because there was a firefight going on right outside of the base.
Wow.
Yeah, that was kind of a wild one.
An F-18 gets up, goes a mile, drops the bomb, then comes back and lands, or do you go back up and you're ready for the next command from?
Yeah, we stayed up there for a while in that particular instance because the firefight was going on for a while. So we stayed overhead for probably 30 minutes or so, dropped a couple of weapons, and they had launched helicopters from the base, so we had Apaches on station as well. Yeah, it was kind of Bagram's not a place that you should attack. That's really a dumb move on the Taliban's part.
It was. Yeah,
it was really dumb. They didn't make it out of it.
They did not.
No.
Now, and you can answer, you don't have to answer obviously, but is there a lot of casualties on our side when somebody gets close to the base like that? Do they catch us by surprise?
Thankfully, no.
Wow, that's so awesome.
Yeah, thankfully, no. We didn't lose anybody. This was in, what was this, 2010, right? They actually they actually tried to jump into the wire. Unfortunately, they picked a really poor place to attack because they attacked the Rangers compound. And so that's not a place you want to attack on a base.
Just because Rangers are such badasses?
Yeah,
why?
They're pretty awesome. They're some of my favorite people in the world.
I love them too. I know I've had the pleasure of meeting several through hunting and through our brands, and went down to Florida and got to go to the Ranger Battalion down there and hang with them and train with them, do some of the snake training and God, it's so cool. Why do you consider them some of the coolest? Are they special forces to a point to where everything that they're doing, from jumping out of airplanes to the ground support, their missions are you just never know what you're going to get as a Ranger? What makes them so invaluable?
Yeah, I mean, obviously I ain't a Ranger, but they're awesome individuals. So, the Ranger Regiment in particular is America's premier light infantry unit, right? So they're there, and they're a special operations unit. So they can, come in by air. They do a lot of water training as well. They're light infantry, so mobile, whether they're using vehicles or helicopters, any number of different insertion methods. But they bring a lot of punch. They punch above their weight for sure. And then their training is just phenomenal. And they're all very highly motivated individuals, which matters a lot in a firefight.
And when you get up over the top of a firefight and you're looking down on it, visually, can you see a lot of what's going on, or is everything being said to you through your audio capture?
Yeah, so you're using your eyes, absolutely. One of the most important things as a fighter pilot is to look the freak outside. So a lot of it's going to depend on the weather, right? So sometimes the enemy really likes to attack when it gets cloudy and stormy, because now that is going to impede our ability to use our eyeballs from on high, or to use the sensors that are on the airplane. So we have like the targeting pod, which is like if you ever watch CNN and you're seeing the video of it's a black and white video of a building and it's sitting there in the crosshairs, and all of a sudden you see this little black thing goes flying through the screen and then the building explodes. I mean, that's you're looking at a targeting pod video. So we're using a combination of looking over the side, using the targeting pod, and then working with those JTACs on the ground, or any other units on the ground that we can talk to on the radio, to form a combined picture of what the battle space looks like. Like, where are the bad guys? Let me go there and kill them.
And when you say you're using your vision, so how high are you? What are you at 10,000 feet? Or are you at 800 feet?
It kind of depends. It honestly depends on the threat environment that you're in, right? Because if I start flying lower and getting down closer, then everybody with a rifle suddenly looks up at you and starts shooting at you. So it depends on the threat environment, right? If I get too far away, now I can't use my eyes, and now I have to use just the sensors in the airplane. So we like to kind of hang in a close air support role, in the 10 to 20,000 foot regime. That kind of, it's a good sweet spot between, it gives you enough look down that you can see the whole battle space, both with your eyes and with the sensors, and then you can employ weapons and get them the right kinematic effects.
And how many weapons are we talking on your fighter jet when you're over there? What you have bombs, you have machine gun artillery on there that you can go down lower and talk to me about what are they equipped with?
Yeah, so every airplane is slightly different as far as what the loadout is. Thankfully, I flew the mighty F-15E Strike Eagle, which carries the most bombs and the most gas and the most SA of anybody in theater. So we would typically fly with a mix of weapons, and it was always kind of dependent on what theater we were in. Use a mix of JDAM, so the Joint Direct Attack Munitions, a GPS guided bomb. We would fly with a kind of a cocktail of those 500 pound to 2,000 pound versions of it, and then you can also have some low collateral damage versions of it that basically don't have as much blast into them, and then all the way down to 250 pound versions of the weapon. So those are great weapons because they're precision bombs. They're easily targetable, and you can provide a wide range of effects. both against buildings, against vehicles, and against personnel. We would also fly laser guided bombs. So now instead of using the GPS, now the bomb is seeking a little bit of laser energy that you're squirting out through that targeting pod, right? So I can find a guy, I can track him with my laser, and now this bomb that I drop is now looking for that laser spot. So those are great weapons as well. So that you always fly a mix of GPS and laser guided weapons. We can fly with dumb bombs as well. Very rarely, in the conflicts ever since 2001, it's pretty much all smart weapons. You just don't use the dumb bombs as much anymore, just because you have to be so precise with your employments, so to not cause excess collateral damage. And then we still got a gun. So the gun on the Strike Eagle and on the F-18 is a 20 millimeter cannon. So you carry around 500 rounds of that in the Strike Eagle. It's 20 millimeter shell. It's basically and as long as it hits with enough velocity, it's got a small explosive charge, kind of like throwing a small hand grenade at somebody. So that's going to be a very effective weapon if you're good with it. But again, that goes back to the skill of the pilot. You look at another airplane like the A-10, right? So that's an airplane that was built around the gun. So it's got a 30 millimeter cannon. So it's this giant freaking shell that can penetrate armor. So that is an incredible weapon, and they carry over 1,000 rounds of that on every single one of those airplanes. And when they're flying slow and with their really good ability with that gun, the A-10 is a monster in a close air support scenario.
And what about you as the pilot, the talent of Biff? Are you good on all the weapons you just named off on the F-18 and the fully loaded version that you were lucky enough to be flying?
I don't know that I'm talented, but I'm pretty darn good at it.
Are you?
Yeah, I'm good.
Okay, so I want to talk about this, and it's not arrogant to me to hear you say this. I'm very infatuated with your ability to go up and be able to hit targets with 20 millimeter, 500 rounds. You have bombs. You're equipped with all of this different variation of weaponry. What made you? Is it your instincts? Was it all training? When you're in theater, is it all instinctual now? Are you going back? Because you can't get a manual out. You can't read anything. You don't have time for that. Is it 100% instincts now? If it's not, if you say that you don't know if it's talent, what makes you be able to have that adrenaline going? Because now you're going from a Travis Pastrana, who's a mutual friend of you and Tim and all these guys. You go from that adrenaline, but now you have to be responsible enough to be aiming weapons and taking lives and protecting our soldiers and getting him or her out of there. What makes you good at it?
It's all the training, man. It's all training. It's all training. So it's because you want to get the training to a level that the training is instinct, right? So that I don't have to think about how to fly it. I don't have to think about how to drop a bomb. I don't have to think about where to put the airplane to be on the right parameters to employ the gun. Because like my training, and I've done so many repetitions of it in training, that in combat, it's easy, right? Like, so the more you sweat in training, the less you bleed in combat. That's true across the board from your ability to employment. So you don't even have to think about it because you know exactly what to do. And that's all just done by countless repetitions and training. So if you're getting to the point where you are, like if I'm feeling a lot of adrenaline while I'm in combat, to me, that's almost that's a real negative, because I shouldn't be feeling that. I should be very comfortable with it. I should be just acting like I do every single day in training. It just is happening for real.
So it's not like riding a bike, you're saying, or is it?
No, it's exactly like riding a bike.
So you don't get the adrenaline rush because you're in a comfort zone. It'd be like a baseball player that gets up to the plate and he's squeezing the bat with all of his muscles and he's squeezing so hard he can't swing. You're saying that you got to be relaxed in there. Your muscle memory has to come in. You just got to be just floating around in the cockpit kind of.
Yeah. And if, it's like, finding that flow state, right? We talk a lot about in fighter aviation, we talk about having flow. And that's kind of a play on words, because we want to always have first launch opportunity in an air-to-air arena. So I'm looking like I want to be able to shoot you before you can shoot me, right? So that kind of goes back to the history of warfare, right? Like if I can only punch you and then you show up with a club and you can hit me with a club, now you've got first launch opportunity. Now if I show up and I've got a bow and arrow and you've got a club, I have first launch opportunity. Grow that thing out. That's the same thing that you have in the fighter jet, right? Like if I've got first launch opportunity, I can hit you before you can hit me. I'm going to win, right? So that's the flow part of it. But you also want to have mental flow, mental and physical flow where everything's working well. You and your Wizzo are kind of on the same page. Your Wizzo, the JTAC, the way that the ground element is moving, what they're doing. Like if you've got flow, you're in it, then everything starts to work well. So yeah, we're always looking for flow.
So your Wizzo's behind you?
Yeah. Yeah. So I had a kind of a cool experience. So I've gotten to sit in both seats. So like when I was in Afghanistan, I was actually a Wizzo. I was a backseater. So I started out as a Wizzo, did 4.5 years as a Wizzo, and then got the opportunity to go back to pilot training and move 6 feet forward, and thankfully went back to the F-15. So I've just kind of seen it from both seats, which is kind of a cool experience for me. And that's why I really like flying in a 2-seat cockpit, because I kind of know what the Wizzo's doing and can hopefully keep that mind meld a little bit better so that it's more effective in combat.
When you can alternate back and forth, as you've done both, you did 4 years as a Wizzo and then you're up front. Is it always the same 2 guys on a mission? Is it so you guys will alternate in and out of those seats even when you're over in theater? So you guys all have to be in tune with each other.
Yeah. So obviously, like a Wizzo is always going to fly in the back seat. The pilot's usually going to fly in the front seat, right? And different squadrons will do it different ways. We call it hard crewing when you are always going to fly with the same Wizzo. Kind of the way that over my couple deployments, I think I've kind of found that it works best is you start out hard crewed for a little while, because you get to learn your Wizzo's habit patterns and kind of flow. He gets to learn yours, or she gets to learn yours. And you can be a really effective team. Like with guys that I've been hard crewed with, we almost don't even have to talk after a couple of missions, because I just know what he's doing and thinking, and he knows or she knows what I'm doing and thinking, and we can kind of set each other up. So when you're hard crewed like that, you can get into a really, you got flow. What that can also lead to, right, on a bigger picture, is you can start to develop bad habit patterns, and you may not grow as much as an aviator. So you always want to be growing. You always want to be getting better, getting a little bit better every day. So having a variety of people that you fly with who have different techniques, different knowledge levels, different experiences, that grows you as an aviator. So yes and no. It's important to fly together because you can really work well together as a team the more often you do it. But you also may not be growing as much. So we'll kind of swap people out every now and then. So we would do like on deployments, we'd usually kind of fly hard crewed for like a month or 2, and then kind of start swapping people in and out. We'd work to swap experience. Like as when I was a young Wizzo, I would fly with an experienced pilot. As I became a more experienced Wizzo, I would fly with a less experienced pilot. Now as an experienced pilot, I fly with young Wizzos. Sometimes I can fly with old Wizzos, and then we just, wreck shop. And you kind of have a mix of it.
So if a Wizzo's not a pilot and something happens to Biff as the pilot, you have a heart attack or you faint in the cockpit, God forbid, can the Wizzo take over that aircraft and successfully stay in combat? Or does he or she have to turn around and return to base right away because they're not ready to take that aircraft into combat?
Yeah. So one of the nice things about flying a Strike Eagle is that there's actually full controls in the back cockpit. So the Wizzo can take the jet, has got a stick and throttles, can actually fly the airplane. And a lot of Wizzos were really great at flying airplanes. I like to think that I was pretty good at flying from the back seat. That's why I went and ended up flying from the front seat. But it's again going to be like an experience thing and an ability thing that they could fly the airplane and the Strike Eagle. I mean, if you're in combat, right, like you're going to need to have both people fully engaged. So I imagine if I had like some catastrophic thing or I got shot, God forbid, like hopefully the Wizzo is going to take me home and save my life. There've been a lot of instances when the pilot is kind of screwed up and the Wizzo ends up taking the airplane and saving the day, which is a great thing in the F-15. In the airplane I currently fly, in the F-18, in most of the versions and in the combat versions of it, there isn't a stick in the back. So you're kind of on your own up there in the front, the Wizzo's got a couple of ways that they can use the autopilot functions in order to maybe save the airplane in the F-18. But the F-18 Wizzos don't fly as much as like the Strike Eagle Wizzos do.
Is there anything that stands out? I know that we're coming to the end of our initial talk. I want to do part 2 ASAP because I want to get more into the actual missions, and I'll talk to you off record as far as like what you can get into, because I'm really intrigued by the actual firefight part of this. Is that the vision part of what you're described today, and then you also are going off of the controls in the plane, which I've been told by pilots in your position that there's not a lot of controls, that it's pretty simplified. I want to kind of get into what that looks like when you're in that cockpit and what it's laid out about. But talk to me when we get on part 2, Biff. I want to get more into what you're actually doing in a firefight. What are you responsible for? Do you know that you have to hit this button, but you might have to transition over to this? And when you do transition over to that, do you have to turn this off? And like, what is all going through your mind? As a hunter, I'm thinking like, well, if the ducks come in, I just hit the safety off and I aim and I point and then I turn the safety back on and then I go out and I send the dog, right? Well, this is a lot different, but I want to see how comparable it is as far as like what your mind's going through and how you're transitioning from one weapon to the next. Plus you're looking down there and you're seeing your brothers and sisters in this firefight. So you're like, you got to react and you got to be precise in your reactions. So I want to get into that more, but what stands out in this initial conversation? What has stood out the most to you of being a fighter pilot? Do you have a brotherhood that it will never be broke with your other fighter pilots and the guys that you came up with, the girls that you came up with in training through the academy, going to theater with them? Has anything struck you down? Has anything ever come to you that's presented you to like, man, I didn't expect this, man. I wasn't ready for this. I wasn't prepared for this. Did somebody that you trained with, did they get perished, and did they perish overseas? Did anything happen? And I want to start building on this part of the conversation as we transition into part 2 and 3. But is anything just keep you up at night, Biff? Does anything keep a smile on your face? Does anything keep you sad? What emotionally are you going through so far after being in theater as many times as you had and serving as many missions as you have?
Yeah, but that's a big question. So I'll try to start unpacking a little bit of it. First off, the brother and sisterhood of a fighter squadron, that's, and particularly when you go to war together, right? Like my best friends in the world are the guys that I've gone to combat with, like 100%. Those are my best friends in the world. They're the guys that, we're kind of all strung across the globe, guys that I went on my first couple deployments with. Some of them are out of the Air Force now. Some of them are overseas doing different things. We're all kind of, I'm off doing a goofy Navy thing for a couple of years. But the guys, the men and women that you go to combat with, those are going to be your friends for life, for sure. The fighter squadron life is a very tight-knit organization by design. Right, because you have to be able to trust the people that you're going to fly with while you're flying combat. So that's kind of the first part of that. Yeah, those are the people that I'm closest to in the world. I'm not married, so I don't have a spouse to compare that to. But from my friends who are married, I think that the squadron life and that brotherhood and that sisterhood is as close as a bond between a spouse, particularly once you've gone to war. Leading into kind of your second question about like those tight bonds and friends that you've lost. Yeah, I've lost a good number of friends over the years, both to combat, as well as to accidents, both in combat and in training. Yeah, I've lost a couple of friends, and we kind of, you remember them, you think back on it. I wear, a KI bracelet for two of my friends that were killed in Afghanistan back in 2009. And yeah, you think about them a lot. You think about them a lot, particularly, as deployments come and go, you kind of remember them as the anniversaries of their deaths come and go. You always kind of think back on them, have a moment of silence, and remember the lives that they led. So yeah, that is a big thing.
Do you still talk to their families? Do you call their wives or their spouses or their cousins or their brothers and sisters and say hello once in a while? Did you have a bond with them that was that deep?
Yeah, you do. Some of them obviously closer than others, and as that list has grown larger over the years and as time passes, you kind of go your separate ways. But yeah, there's still a couple that I still keep in contact with.
So knowing that you went through that and the way we started this conversation, but you also are sitting here telling me now that you've lost people close. But again, it might come as an expectation of doing what you do for a living. So has that ever made you question or regret your decision for being in that cockpit of seeing those friends perish?
No, not at all. No, it comes with the job, and like when we were in training, even going all the way back to being at the academy, like I knew that everybody you start with isn't who all you're going to finish with. That's just part of it. You just got to be good and hopefully be a little bit lucky too.
So as we transition into part 2 of this conversation, Biff, do you think that you will be in theater again? I know you want to be. At 37, do you think you will be?
Yeah, there's always wars to fight.
And you're prepared. You're ready. Right now, you could go right now.
Bag's already packed, man.
Are your abs in good enough shape? Like, do you have to have strong abs to be in the cockpit? Like, how important is physical training? I want to get into this in part 2 too. Sure. Do you have to stay in top tip physical training to be the best fighter pilot imaginable? Like, do you got to have a strong core, your abs, your neck muscles, your bicep? Do you have to be a physically strong person, or do you maybe not have to be, but does it help?
It absolutely helps. Yeah, absolutely helps. Because if you can't take the G-forces and you're physically suffering while flying an airplane, you're not going to be as mentally engaged and be as effective in combat. So absolutely, you have to, and it helps to be in the best shape possible.
So I want to get into that. As far as your bags are packed and you're ready to roll, I want to get into the life that you live as we get into these missions you're living and you're in between deployments. I want to get into the regiment. I want to get into the mindset of when you're a baseball player and it's a month out of spring training, you might go to Vegas for one last hurrah, and then you get to spring training and you nut down a little bit and you start, really getting in shape to go through that 162 game. It's a grueling season for baseball. Is a fighter pilot, or is it gym time? Is it training? Is it nutrition? Is it mindset? Is it focus drills? Is it systematic breathing drills? I want to get into everything that your life pertains. Like, I look at you and I have a conversation with you and it's just second nature. Like, oh yeah, I go over there and I get in the gun, I got drop bombs, and I'm over here and I'm taking off at 3,000 feet and I'm going 500 miles an hour. Like, that shit's crazy to me. I want to get into your mind. Like, how do you live your regimented life of being at the top fighter pilot that you can be in the Navy and the Air Force and what you've done? I just find it fascinating, man. I just find it so fascinating that stuff really goes on, and that I don't know what our media depicts and how we've learned through it, through the media's eyes of seeing what our veterans and what our active duty military does. But talking to you, it's just a freaking job. You said that, quote unquote, it's a job. And that's part of the job. And that's just so fascinating to me, because it's not. It truly isn't. And for you to have that mindset, I want to dig into that a little bit, Biff, of like, how do you live your life? Like, can you have a FaceTime conversation with me and Tim Montana, which, by the way, I want to get into him more because that dude's badass. He's a great American and just a stud human being. And his wife is awesome. His family's awesome. But you can have a FaceTime video with a whiskey over that, but you have this regimented life that you have to be prepared at all times. It's like, I want to get into that a little bit, man. So yeah. I'm fascinated by what you do. I'm humbled that you would come onto the podcast and share it. And I just want to give our listeners and our audience an idea that this stuff is going on. And then maybe it'll spark somebody. Hey, maybe it's a recruiting process that we can get it out there that, hey, this is an awesome lifestyle, and to get people more enthusiastic about becoming a fighter pilot, maybe. And I don't know if that's even needed in today's military. I would assume it is.
Absolutely it is, man. We're always looking for the top tier and people who want to get after it. I love it. It's been a great life for me. And I'm happy to get into some more of that, the discipline of being a fighter pilot.
I want to get into that because I am so intrigued because I am a duck hunter, and duck hunters are looked at like, you could just be, 350 pounds and stand up against a tree and chew some Copenhagen and spit every once in a while and blow your duck whistle. And here they come in. Well, I want to do things different. I want to be more regimented. I want to be more disciplined. I want to be the fighter pilot of duck hunters. And I'm not taking anything away from what you do. I'm just saying the mindset, man, the focus and just how you get through that. And then on top of all of it, you're still taking the responsibility of aiming a gun or a bomb at another human being and taking that life to save another life. To me, it's unbelievable, bro. So kudos to you. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for what you do for our country. And I can't wait to get back on part 2. And we'll talk. We'll get into this deeper and deeper, man. I truly appreciate your time.
Yeah, you bet, Chad. It's my pleasure. The dude abides.
We're all equal, that's what I think. I don't believe heaven has a bank. Make good use of your time on earth.